Here we go, and here we are. So, hello everybody again. My name is Martin Jelinek. My colleague here is Volsicka, and our session today is titled Building Custom and Cost-Effective Mobile Analytics. Before I jump into the content itself, a quick and painless introduction from our end so you know who you're actually dealing with. So my name is Martin, currently head of marketing at AppAgent. My background, economics. Then I was a game developer owning my own game studio for a couple of years. Ended up in mobile marketing, specializing in data. And I designed most of AppAgent's internal marketing or analytics tools for mobile. And with me here is Vid Volsicka. Please introduce yourself also.
Hi, I'm Vít. My background is computational biology, and then I worked 3 years for Ministry of Healthcare, and then before 3 years, I joined AppAgent as a data analyst and data engineer, and I technically created the tools Martin designed.
Yep. So basically, Veet is the smartest guy, and I was rather the client-facing guy that knows what people need and how to actually integrate the data and insights into the day-to-day operations. So this is us, our company, AppAgent. I'm not gonna go into any kind of a sales pitch. This is just like we're a full-stack marketing team, and we're kind of the analytics branch of the company. Together, there's around 15 people in the company. We work for app and gaming companies. And why we are here and why we're actually talking is because number one, we've built our own internal analytic tools that we use for clients. And number two, we actually built a couple of custom analytics stacks and infrastructures for our clients. So we actually, over the past 3 years, gained quite a lot of experience. And today we'd like to share that through a case study of one of our clients. But before we get to that, I'm actually going to go through an introduction, kind of talking about why people select custom analytics, what's in it for them, and stuff like that. So before I jump even into that, what is today's session going to be about, and what you're going to learn? What are the key takeaways for you guys here? So number one, you should, in case you're considering it, get a partial takeaway about whether building a custom analytics stack would make sense for your company. Then number two, how does the process even look like? And sorry, I'm probably going to have to invite Hector too. Hi, Hector, how's it going? Welcome to our session. We already started. So yeah, number two, how does the process look like? That's basically the main part, and that's hopefully why you are all here for. And key takeaway number three, just get some inspiration on tools that we've been using. We're going to be throwing bits and pieces of our experience around during the presentation. So we really should be kind of opening our can of knowledge and showing you how we did things and what we learned along the way. And while we're talking, besides our background, what's great about the agency, there's a short learning cycle. So we tried a lot of tools, we tried connecting a lot of tools, and due to the short learning cycle, we actually, I believe, know our way around pretty well. We also understand that there's many companies on the market, and some have a very deep knowledge and know their shit, know what they want, and are very advanced and have a team of people. But on the other hand, there's companies which are very small and are just kind of starting to find their way into the topic. So this presentation hopefully will kind of reflect that, and everybody can find something pretty interesting for himself. And number three, most importantly, we've built a couple of these things and we're kind of still learning. This is our way of doing things. That's what we're passing over. We're not saying it's the best thing under the sun since the sliced bread, but it worked for us pretty well. And I think that this is some valuable stuff. So part number one, the what and whys. So the name of the topic, building custom and cost-effective mobile analytics. So first of all, what is custom? My first kind of direction of how to define it, what is the level of customization that companies can take? And on the very left, you've got a low level of customization, which is companies just buy tools and use them. On the right side, there's high level of customization, buy tools, buy hardware and actually write everything yourself. That's not what we're advocating, and that's probably not what's kind of the sensible approach. Our approach is use the tools that work, and then build the rest. Basically means connecting data from different data sources, implementing bits and pieces into the infrastructure that you can't build yourself, but still then build something on top that will serve exactly the purpose that you need it to. So that's custom. Now, what is mobile analytics? And I believe it's pretty important to just kind of frame it because everybody understands it a bit differently. Everybody has different needs and different tools is depending on the size of the company and business model. So what is mobile analytics? Yeah, can be a different thing. There's a bazillion of tools on the market. So in case you just gazed into this very famous Chief Martech outline or infographic, you can see that it's very daunting. And the whole thing is obviously for the whole tech landscape, but even the mobile part has a significant size. So there's a lot of tools. And to kind of narrow it down a bit about what we're going to be talking about today, we don't like to think about different tools. We rather like to think about features that we want and features that each developer or each mobile company should strive to have. And I think that you're going to be very familiar with all of these, but still, like for synchronization purposes, I find it really important to mention. It's product analytics, basically gives you information about how people behave in their apps. So is the funnel, is the sessions, is the activity and stuff. Then attribution. So in case you're running user acquisition campaigns, or you just kind of want to understand where your valuable users come from, you need an attribution provider. So that's why it's mentioned here. Attribution and then some other data from the networks and sources like that come together in what we call marketing analytics. So that's for marketers to understand what the value is of users. For product people, another very important part is a CRM system or a messaging system for push messages and emailing flows. So that's also something that we kind of call a feature, which is very common basically for all apps. And then there are reporting tools, which sometimes sit on top of the whole infrastructure and provide you charts and visualizations. And besides that, kind of sitting on the sideline are ASO tools, which are usually specialized tools for ASO managers, but which also have very important data inside of them. And we like to take the data either for keyword ranks or even store data, which these ASO tools usually put together and have or make accessible through a very simple API. So ASO kind of tools, if I can call it a feature, also definitely has a part in the custom stack and is very frequently overlooked, or the connection is overlooked. And last but not least, market intelligence, especially in the beginning. You're going to need some market understanding if you're bringing a new game on the market, deciding, or just having an understanding what works or what doesn't work in terms of verticals, types of games and stuff. Market intelligence is definitely something you want, but it's not that frequently seen to be connected into the whole marketing stack or the whole mobile analytics stack. And last but not least, there can be also tools like RevenueCat. And I believe there's guys on the call from RevenueCat, and they provide once again just some additional like input into the whole system. And in their case, it can be subscriptions revenue tracking, which is historically a huge pain point for basically each app that decided to go the subscription route. And there can be a bazillion of different other analytics tools, which add tiny bits and pieces. But this kind of overview is our framework. This is like the most common features that we consider. And we put these together into 3 buckets. Once again, this is common terminology, product analytics, marketing analytics, and ASO analytics. Each of these kind of covers a different part. Ideal setup. Now we're kind of getting into the actual setup. So what is that? In our opinion, there's a couple of characteristics that everybody should strive for eventually. Number one, all data in one place, so you got access to it, you can combine it, you can do whatever you want with it, which doesn't usually happen if you're locked down by a vendor or you don't have all data in one place. It should be affordable. That's when the pricing comes in. It should be user-friendly. So obviously a good visualization tool where you can have a lot of freedom when analyzing data is important. and obviously customizable. Sadly, no tools are like that, so we kind of have to always think about how we should approach acquiring our analytical stack and what decisions to make on the way. I think I'm just gonna skip this because it's actually done in much more detail later on in the actual case study. But I'm gonna stop here. Uh, and I think this is also important to mention about the priorities uh, of our development of our stacks and what we also seen has the greatest value for clients. Uh, so what do we start with, and what I believe everybody should start with are automated data pools. I think it's like far back into the history where people did manual reports and stuff. But still, I think around 40% of our clients actually do something like that. So it's not that uncommon. And there's a lot of talks about automations and LTV predictions and stuff. But the truth is, actually, a lot of people are still doing data manually, even we're in 2020. So no shame in that, but really, that should be kind of coming back into the past. Then next on that, automated reporting and dashboards. Once you've got the data, obviously you can do automated reporting. And then on top of that, ROI predictions, which is once you actually understand the data, you should be able to predict and you should be able to optimize your campaigns. And on the very top, there's some auto recommendations and automated bidding, which is something that should eventually come into the stack in terms of marketing, but usually should not be a priority at first in case you're struggling with the first couple of steps. So in terms of the pyramid, this is kind of something that we see it in terms of priority. Now, what does custom mean? The custom, in our opinion, or the best way to put it that I found is basically you need a data engineer to do things to your data. So the data are not siloed anymore. You already have some person that's kind of connecting stuff, creating integrated insights, and a good way to put it, you've got a data engineer. And once you actually go to a custom type of data, let me see, actually, oh, damn it, one slide got lost, but what can I do? Um, to connect back to the original thread, you've got the data engineer, and the data engineer will not do everything by himself. So obviously, the logical idea is to pick a platform that already includes a lot of the tools, does the heavy lifting for you, and then the data engineer comes and does kind of the connections and the ETLs and stuff. And there's a couple of platforms that you can use for that. We ourselves are using the Google Cloud Platform. We've been using that for mostly historical reasons because we started with it and we were always basically happy with it. So there was no way to switch. The pricing is okay-ish. Some people use Amazon. We're aware of that and prefer that. We got some experience with Amazon, but just due to the sheer amount of, on the other hand, the experience with GCP, we just never transferred, but we know it's a viable choice. But for Google Cloud Platform, what kind of speaks is Firebase with a lot of features that I don't know if Amazon actually does have all the features like Google Cloud Platform. Whatever the case, we just prefer Firebase for all the capabilities, and it gives us basically all that we need. And why do people choose building over buying? And what we see the most often, the most common phrases are that tools are too expensive, which we know all too well, and that people are just frustrated that the silo data doesn't give proper insights, that they can't define their own metrics, they can't make custom connections. So the data being expensive, or on the other hand, or actually sometimes even both together, are the deal breaker for many people, and they start searching for custom solutions. And the last point before the actual case study, cost effective. So analytics tools can cost a lot of money. And in case you ever bought analytics tools, you know that attribution and good product analytics, a high-end CRM and a good visualization tools can basically cost fortune. Not many companies want to invest that much money, and especially when scaling, it can become super expensive. And on the other hand, for small companies, it doesn't make sense to verify the concepts and ideas on expensive tools. So can we actually make a conclusion that custom analytics are cost effective? Well, obviously not. It really depends on the case. It really depends on the tools pricing you can get, the engineering experience of the team. We've got the maintenance, the costs, and a lot of other things. But in general, most likely, yes. In the long term, it should be cost effective. And the greatest conclusion here, I believe you're on a great session. In case you don't have your own analytics yet, we definitely advise to look into it because in the long term, if you're serious about the app business, you're just gonna have to go there. For growth, later stages, nothing will save you from custom analytics unless you really want to spend a lot of money. And even then, I believe it's just more efficient for the team to have their own custom tools. And for initial stages, in case you're there and wondering about it, you probably should know how things are being created, and that's what we're gonna show you today. But in many cases, you don't really have to build anything right from the get-go. There are ways you can get the insights that you need without actually building anything. There's a lot of awesome tools which have free tiers in the beginning, and it's a great solution for many apps. Just keep in mind that very often you can get a nasty lock-in, and you can have some problems uh, when using expensive tools because the way pricing tiers are often designed is that basically in the beginning you only pay a very low fee or it's completely free, but then once you start scaling up, it actually skyrockets. So once you're getting into the growth stage, the last thing that is on your mind is thinking about building something. So keep it in mind that it can become a problem when calculating the costs and your like growth strategies. And now, part number two is the actual case. And now we're going to get serious about how we actually approach the process of building a custom analytics stack. And I believe that the best way to demonstrate things from start to finish is to actually use a case study, kind of show you how we think about it, how we select the tools, how we connect them. And one last disclaimer, because we were kind of struggling with in what depth should we share our process on this call. So we kind of chose a middle ground. In case you're going to have some more specific questions, which hopefully some of you will have, we'll be super happy to get into more detail in the following Q&A or just in questions over email. It's really impossible just to tier the content perfectly, obviously. So now to the case. Our actor in this case will be StudyCat, which is a game app for small kids, which teaches them languages. It's called Fun English. And StudyCat basically approached us that they don't have any analytics at that point, and they wanted us to build something for them because they were pretty tech savvy even at that time and understood that the journey ahead for them is basically through a custom analytics stack. And we started. And this is our process. And I think that there's a lot of merit to it. In case you're considering building your own thing, then perhaps this is a nice framework that you can follow. So we started with analyzing the needs. As everybody knows, every company is different. And in case you're doing custom stuff, you should really take advantage of you being able to do custom stuff, very well tiered to what they need. So in the beginning, we started asking questions. So how many downloads you've got, how many apps you've got, uh, how many users, platforms, what type of a business model, how much money you've got. There's a lot of questions. And based on these questions, there's a lot of possible answers. So depending on the budget, you're already thinking about what tools can you include in the stack. Depending on the number of users and number of acquired users and profit channels, you're probably going to think about which attribution tool to choose. In case you're using some tools, you want to make sure that they can be connected to the infrastructure that you're planning. Required frequency of data processing, something essential. In case you're okay with data being batch processed once a day, you can actually use the setup that we're talking about today. But in case you want real-time data, you'd probably have to be using completely different tools for a completely different cost. It also very much depends on the company being able to do their own SQLs and their general tech saviness. So in case you don't have these people in the team, either hire them or just don't do it at this point. There's gonna have to be a person that fixes stuff if it breaks, and stuff is gonna break. and there's gonna have to be a person that does custom analysis in case it's needed. So in case you don't have such a person, then perhaps it's just much easier for you to take some off-the-shelf tools and use these. So we analyzed the needs, and based on that, we came up with a set of tools to then be implemented into the stack. So for product analytics, we selected Google Firebase. Why? It's a free tool, simply. It lives on the Google Cloud Platform. It's got a lot of other features connected to it. So on the platform, you can have crash analytics. You can have machine learning capabilities. You can have A/B testing or a simple CRM type of functionalities. So Firebase as a platform, very commonly used, and something that we struggled with in the past, but believe that like during the past year or so actually came a long way into being quite a robust tool for developers, and that's why we're using it. And the best, obviously, thing about it is that it's free and allows a lot of other features. For attribution, in this case, we actually selected Kochava, and it was due to the reason that Kochava had a super friendly pricing, $100 monthly for also providing organic raw data, which was great at the time. Eventually, we learned that Kochava does not, in this case, at least in this case, doesn't work too well, and we were getting some crap data. So we're not using it anymore, but originally the pricing was just beating everybody else, as it's very hard and usually quite costly to get organic raw data. For marketing analytics, this was basically done in a custom fashion. So we created marketing analytics based on Syndicat's needs. And for CRM system, also Firebase was implemented as a reporting tool. Once again, another Google Cloud Platform tool, Google Data Studio. And for ASO tool, we chose AppFollow, number one, because we've got good relationships with them. Number two, because it allows us to download all data we need through APIs. And in this case, it was just a clear fit to what StudyCat needed. Yeah, and also super friendly pricing, which is another thing that we also need to consider. So this was kind of the table that summarizes what we chose, and this is a schema of the tool set. And I'm going to go through the schema of the selected tools now in a bit more detail. So how do we collect data? Everything starts with collecting data about how people are using the app. So as mentioned, we are using Firebase Analytics. It's free, it's a part of the GCP, and it's enough to basically, the developer integrates an SDK, implements the events that we define, and then the events can be very easily dumped into BigQuery, into an online database. It's like a one-click type of a setting. So basically, if you've got Firebase, you can just use BigQuery. And one additional point, I believe it kind of recently came into being, that you can also send data from Firebase right to Google Analytics. So you can basically use all of the Google Analytics advanced analysis tools and dashboards that many people are used to analyze product data, which is extremely handy. The downside is very hard to get some attribution information into the Google Analytics. So in my mind, it's kind of still a good way to analyze product data, however deep you want to analyze it in GA, but it's very limited in other ways once you want to connect it to other data.
I would add that the Google Analytics are now in a new version, Web Plus App version, which is more fitted to Firebase needs. It's more like event-based than screen-based, as you probably know from web analysis.
Yep, good point, V. There's one thing that I'd add, in case you want to use Firebase, and that's a mistake or misunderstanding a lot of people have, is that you can just use Firebase as an analytics tool. And without Google Analytics, it's actually not really true. You can have access to default dashboards in Google Firebase, but they only provide super limited information. And all the fancy stuff becomes accessible once you send the raw data into Google BigQuery. So a lot of people were super disappointed with Firebase because they saw the initial default dashboard. But that's not all there is to it. It's just like, I don't know why it's even there, because it never made much sense. So that's Google Firebase as the product data collector. For attribution, I already mentioned that we selected Kochava in this case. Other than that, we've got experience with WebSplorer and Adjust. We're kind of indifferent, if I were to express experience with it, in which one we're using. Usually it ends up being a matter of can we get organic raw data from the tool or not. WebSplorer kind of infamously has it priced for, I believe, $500 monthly in case you want that. For Adjust, it's kind of included in the pricing, but in general, I think that the offers are somehow higher than of WebSplorer. So especially for smaller apps, it can make a big difference, these $500. So in this case, it's kind of reason why we ended up using Kochava, but not a good experience with it, honestly. So we're probably just gonna go back to AppsFlyer and Adjust because that's what are kind of our proven partners in a sense. What do we get from attribution? Obviously, we need to understand where users are coming from. And in order for us to use this data in the whole infrastructure, we need its data in the raw format. So we need to get an API export of number one, installations with timestamps, and number two, with purchases, and all of these with that attribution piece of information. And then we kind of reconstruct that in our own tools. For ad network data, that's obviously one integral part of marketing analytics. So for ad network data, we're once again connecting over APIs to the ad networks and downloading the data and dumping them on that one pile to BigQuery. We're using a combination of our own connectors and connectors that are already written in Matillion, which is an ETL tool that we're using. More on that later. Important note, in case we used more ad networks, we definitely would never go for our own connectors and our own solution. That's something that we were initially warned by Lior Barak about, that in case you're going to have more connectors, you actually have to have one person sitting there and maintaining the connectors because APIs change. I wouldn't say frequently, but in case you've got 10 ad networks, it can really become a nightmare. So in case there's more ad networks that you're using besides the basic ones, I definitely go for a tool that would just put all these data together and send it over the API to you in bulk, because that would make it very easy to work with just one API instead of 10. And then you're also kind of putting the responsibility of getting the data properly to that outsourced tool. Now for subscription data. In this case, unfortunately, we were not able to use anything like RevenueCat or the Co because it was due to the framework that the developers used. So it was not possible to integrate it at that point. So the client decided to build their own solution. And I guess the RevenueCat guys will be happy to hear that, but it was extremely painful, and it took, I think, 6 months, and it was still not polished. We've got the same experience with all subscription apps that decided to go with their own solution. It's a very painful journey with a lot of exceptions in the data that you're receiving. That not really recommended in case it's not something that you absolutely need to do. I definitely would vouch for everybody using an existing service because it's a real pain. So that would be for subscriptions. Then for ASO data, as we mentioned, it was AppFollow. Friendly pricing gives us all that we need. And all of these things were transferred through API connectors into our data warehouse in Google BigQuery. Then the data is basically sitting there on one pile. And in case you want to leverage it anyhow, you need to kind of chew through it, transform it a bit, and make it so the data is as accessible in some nice, let's say, tables that then can be visualized. So that's what we're using this tool called Matillion for. And it's our ETL tool. It lives on the Google Cloud Platform on a virtual machine that can be turned on and off. And this tool is responsible for the whole ETL and orchestration. So we basically launch all the scripts, all the transformation from that one point. And once the data is transformed into these nice and wonderfully looking tables that can be visualized, they're once again saved into Google BigQuery, and we're using Data Studio to access them. So the Data Studio is the end point for visualization. Once again, Google Data Studio honestly sucked these 3 years ago when we started to use it. Nowadays, it's much better. There's a lot of cool stuff, and like the whole development, to be honest, over the past 3 years, kind of led us to believe that Firebase is a platform that's got future. Like Google, I think, heavily invests into it, and as always with the big machines, Google's got some problems about being slow and having 10 different tools for one thing. But in general, Google Cloud Platform, and especially its mobile tools, kind of went a long way since we started working on them. So Data Studio nowadays, for normal users, a great tool. It's in the browser, very easy to set up. Everybody can use it, super easy to share, no plugins required. So for us, Data Studio is just like for a free tool, it's a wonderful thing. And last but least, what I also wanted to touch upon, there's free views that we use to look on data. We're gonna get back to it later on. But in general, we've got 3 dashboards. One is for product insights, mostly used for product managers. So for guys that want to understand how the product works. Then marketing view, that's the ROIs and ROASes and understanding about how the user acquisition works, and the App Store view. We're going to show you more later on. And before we actually embarked into building the whole thing, we calculated how much would such a tool cost when it comes to operations. And we got a calculator. In case you would like us to calculate something for you, feel free to reach out. We're just going to input a couple of very simple data points and give you, I think, a good understanding in general how much would the BigQuery cost you per month, per year. And in this case, you can see that we did input the 250K monthly active users, tried some simple settings like number of sessions per month. We basically said, hey, the person will probably have around 5 sessions per day, and he's going to send 10 events per session. So how much does it mean in yearly costs? And you see that it's only $2,000. So I understand it's probably hard to relate that to your app's usage. That's why I mentioned, in case you're interested in us looking at it, just throw your numbers our way. But to give you a good idea about how much would probably other tools cost when you've got 250,000 monthly users, that probably would be tens of $1,000s for the product analytics itself per year. So you can see how cost efficient and effective can such a setup be, even if this business is kind of, it's not a huge business. It's got only 250,000 monthly active users. So the yearly costs are very interesting, and that's why we're here talking about it. Can be a great alternative, and this is the cost efficiency. For Matillion, we've got actually a wonderful hack that allows us not to pay a lot for it. The virtual machine can be just turned on and off, and you're only paying per hour. So as we are batch processing the data once a day, just turn it on, do the processing, and then turn it off. So it basically only costs us $1 per day because it costs $1 per hour. So that's where the $365 of yearly costs come from. And for Kochava, well, basically add your attribution partner's pricing here. It can be anything. Looked great for Kochava. Unfortunately, it did not work too well. But yep, that's what it was. So you can see that for a couple $1,000s, you can get price-wise a pretty good setup. At least, you know, if we're talking about the maintenance costs for the first year. So now that we know what tools are we using, we start implementing the event collection for product analytics. Simply put, we suggest to always collect everything. The data storage is extremely cost effective. It's very low. So unless it becomes an issue, just collect everything. And in case it becomes an issue and you've got some terabytes and you don't want to pay for them, and it actually goes into your monthly bill, you can always go and aggregate all the data. And that way, it basically costs you nothing once again, but you're keeping, I don't know, 80, 90% of the information that was included. So We always kind of recommend keeping the raw data for at least 2 or 3 months, unless it's a problem, and in that case, it basically costs nothing. So that would be it. For defining the events, in general, documentation-wise, we're using Google Sheets to communicate with everybody, and we create these huge tables that basically document everything that we do. And it starts with events. So we want to track each and everything that the person can do inside of the app. We define the event name, the parameters, and when it should be fired, and what's the data type. So then, when the data engineer starts to do his job, he can be super sure that he's looking at the correct stuff. So we start with the events definition sheet. Developers implement the whole thing, and in the meanwhile, we go through the metrics and dashboards definition phase. And I stress this phase a lot because this is one of the key advantages, I believe, of custom analytics. It's kind of being able to connect multiple bits and pieces together, number one, and number two, just define how the metric should look like. And a lot of people have a problem that they don't understand, for example, what a session is in Mixpanel or even in Firebase or in any other tool. There are metrics that are being collected by default, and some tools allow you to kind of twist and turn them into what you really need. Some don't. And we always start and recommend to start with your end in mind, like who's going to look at the data and how should we then define it so it actually makes sense, even as an absolute value. So for a session, how is that defined? How can you kind of mine that information from the events that you're collecting? And it can be very challenging. So I consider this as an extremely important stage because right now you're basically defining what you're going to be looking at. And if you don't nail it, a lot of people will become confused and a lot of decisions will be made that don't really fit what's realistically going on in the app. So for metrics, we created once again such a table. There's nothing groundbreaking. It's just that everything is very well thought out from the get-go. So what is a new user? What exactly is the event that we're going to be using for flagging the new user? Is this going to be the first launch? Or will we consider the new user just as a person that already sends some kind of a tangible event that provides an activity? Which can be a big difference because first opens and kind of the first active users can be very different. And the same thing goes for everything else. It can be the length of session. So how we're going to calculate it. Who is the actual active user? Who's the engaged user? And these are metrics that everybody knows and everybody works with them. But if you ask companies like, what does it really mean? Few people actually know what it does mean. It can become very confusing and there can Many problems can be connected when misinterpreting the data, which was badly defined in the first place. So for metrics, we document everything, and writing it down actually forces you to think about which events will be used and forces you to think about who's going to use the data. So that's a great thought exercise to start with when defining what will the metrics be like later on. And for dashboards, we also have, surprise, surprise, another table. And even before people start to create things in Data Studio, we've got a clear outline about what the different user groups will be looking at. One thing, if we worked on projects where there were more than 30 dashboards, nobody ever used them. It's like what we know for sure. We actually implemented Google Analytics into Data Studio to learn whether people are in fact using the dashboards and what are they using, and it was dreadful. People are really kind of used to looking at the main metrics, at least the high level users, and lots of things that they requested that they thought will eventually be interesting was just never used. So that's why we also kind of force people to come up with, hey, what are the views that you will be working with on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis? What is it? And you've got 10 slots. Pick wisely. And it brings great results because it forces once again people to think rather than then just being swarmed with different metrics and a lot of data. It's very important to kind of limit that, and that's what we are doing. with these tables, giving people slots, and then having them decide and having them think. The next phase, we basically know what we're after. We define the metrics. We know what tools we're going to be using. We know what dashboards will we create. So now it's time to just implement and test it. So that's what happens in the next stage. And after that's done, we go to the next phase, which is the setup, ETL, and orchestration phase. And I already mentioned that we're using a tool which is called Matillion. And what happens in this phase? Well, first of all, we need to set up all the accounts based on the defined architecture. We need to connect all of these through APIs, write the scripts, aggregate the data, set up the pipeline and stuff. And it's a process by itself. And I believe that it's time to kind of get a bit more technical and give you more or a deeper understanding about how are we kind of launching things, what tables do we have, and how does it look on the inside. So right now, I'll pass the word to my colleague Vid here, who will guide you through this part of the presentation, where we're going to go deeper through the orchestration part.
Hello once again. So we, as Martin said, we use Matillion. There exists plenty of similar tools, for example, Xplenty, Stitch Data, Apache Airflow, etc. But we gone by this because it was also recommended to us by Jessica Bichego from what's called? From Blinkist. Yeah, because they also use it and they are really satisfied. And we are also quite satisfied with this tool. And the basic setup is that it's when you want to start with your own custom analytics and orchestrations, etc. You choose Matillion from Google Cloud Store. You install the actually it is installed. You just click select the right plan. It's installed on a virtual machine. It's priced per hour, so we created also in Google Cloud by Cloud Scheduler, turning on and off this virtual machine, so we save some money. And one good thing about Matillion is that it's quite visual, so it's easy to see how data flows. So this is how looks the master node, let's say, where here are all data steps we need to do, and this is run every day in the morning, like 4 a.m. I think, after the virtual machine is turned on. So I will guide you through each step, each level of this whole process. So all it starts with downloading all data from all data sources we need. It's like attribution, a network, subscriptions, and these, as you can see, these three boxes are actually doing this. And when you click on it, you will go inside, and here you can see how it actually looks like for 10 apps. For each app, we query the API of Kochava and download data on Google Cloud Storage, and then we load it to the BigQuery. Also, we download data from Facebook, Apple Search Ads. Just Google Ads are done by other way because they have own connector right to BigQuery. And we have here a fuck-up control, which is this red like arrows, which means that when data are not downloaded, it tries once more, and when it also fails, then whole orchestration is stopped, because this is really important to have all data for previous day on place. And because the errors are usually really different, there's no way how to handle this like automatically. So usually someone who for example, data engineer must take a look what's wrong and repair it. Yeah, when all is done, then we can move to actual data transformation. The breakdown of this step will be on the next slide. But what we are doing in this step is like connecting all Firebase data from the export in BigQuery. We are flattening this structure because BigQuery use nested fields, which means like table in table, and it's harder to get this data via SQL. And also in this step, we connect all data together. So we connect attribution data, subscription data, and we delete unnecessary data which are in Firebase, and we don't need them anymore. So we delete them. So when we have all data on like prepared, then we split events into separate tables, and it's because of optimizing BigQuery speed and costs. Because usually you need to look just on installs, so it's even first open, or you want to know how many sessions was done today. So you are looking into event session start. So when it's in a separate table, like a table session start, um, you don't need to go through whole table with every event, but you are choosing just this one. So it's faster, and you are querying less data, so it's faster and less costly. And the whole process for every event is name is taken, and then adding some or adjusting it to the exact table and storing it. Yeah, and the last part, which happens simultaneously with downloading data, is checking delayed data, because Firebase can, when you are offline and using the app, data are stored for 3 days, and when you go online, it can be sent retrospectively. So data in BigQuery can change up to 3 days. So we are looking at all data and check whether some new events arrived or not. If yes, then we split them into the event tables with the same process. Yeah, and finally, when like whole orchestration is done, we query a Metalon API for the results, store them in BigQuery, and then I have a simple Data Studio dashboard where I can see whether everything was fine, and I can see a success, or it writes me if what failed, which component. So I exactly know where to look, and it make faster the reparation. And also you can send this dashboard to your email every day, so you can see every morning if everything's fine or not.
Yeah, by the way, for Data Studio, there's one awesome feature where you can just send daily reports of your choosing to your email. So that's, for example, something that we've been working on for some time, to actually allow that for ASO data, because some people just kind of want to receive ASO data, but in some how to call that, condensed way. So they can define the report they want, and then we basically create it in Data Studio, and then automatically gets sent as a PDF onto people's emails, which is super handy. And once again, for high-level execs, it's the best thing ever. They don't really want to dive deep into the data, just kind of want to understand, hey, is everything okay, or is there something going on that should be examined? And this allows them to do that in 5 minutes every week, for example. So it can be extremely handy sending these reports. One last bit around how we look at data and how we structure it. We look at data in three different ways. This mostly applies to marketing data, but I believe it can be also used for other types of data, like product. Uh, we actually take the same data from attribution and from ad networks and from Firebase or wherever, and we look at them in three ways. And we've got a table for each of these ways. The first wave is a standard cohort type of a view, where we check people like cohorted based on when they were acquired, and we are watching their behavior or their monetization over time. So we get that cohort, standard cohort behavior. Then you get a dates table, which basically only looks at a certain portion of time and sees what happens only in that limited portion of time. So it's basically how much money did we make in January, or how many sessions were there during that week. And it's a very different way of looking at the same data that gives you very different insights. Like for cash flow, for example, you don't really worry that much about cohort, but you rather worry about the date type of a view. And then we also examine the lifetime quote unquote view that basically takes all the cohorts and normalizes them on day zero. You probably intuitively already know that in the way of LTV curves, that you take users that you acquired over 3 months, and then you're looking at their LTV curves. And that view can be extremely useful to understand what happens in users' lifetimes. How does the curve of total sessions evolve between days 30 or 60? Or in case you've got some kind of an in-game item that users are buying, you want to see when in their lifetime they actually start buying that and when they stop buying that. It can be super useful information. So you get that from the lifetime table. And we're looking at data through these three lenses, and each of them gives great insights of different sorts. And the last step of the whole process, visualization. We mentioned that we're using Data Studio, so just a couple of examples about how does the quote-unquote finished product looks. The data has been scrambled, so it's not really from the clients. It's really used to kind of demonstrate how that can look. So for example, in terms of breaking down the data and filtering it, this is like the standard filtering or dimensions. Version, app names, devices, acquisition channels, platforms, countries, subscription status. So you can filter users based on these things. You can filter them basically on anything because it's custom. But this is what we see most common, kind of being required. And then it just looks as a normal dashboard in any tool. And Data Studio is not the most advanced visualization tool out there, obviously, and it's got a lot of limitations. But in the end, you're probably just gonna end up, realizing that you only need, for the most part, just really simple things anyway, and the rest is eye candy. And if you're willing to pay for it, be my guest. But I still believe this provides a good alternative. So this would be a product dashboard, standard retention, funnels, and trend lines. This is how our marketing dashboards, for example, looked. And it's once again kind of an example of what can you achieve with Data Studio more than anything else, and with the data that we transformed. This is something that's used for high-level reporting to understand things like how they go and the general trends. And this is UA Manager's dashboard. So once again, it's all being done in Data Studio. It can be formatted pretty well. All data that you need can be here. It can be filtered by your standard drop-downs.
Or you can click on Facebook right in the channels and it will filter the tables below. So it's a new feature and really cool.
Yep. And there's a lot of things that we could probably add to the marketing data and the marketing dashboards and how we approach it and what can it do, because there's a lot of stuff that can't be seen just on a simple screen. But as we're running out of time, I'm just gonna proceed. So very quickly, in case you're wondering what effort needs to be put into creating something similar that we went through right now, so that means kind of the study cat dashboard type of a thing. In our case, our expectation would be two people working for 3 months, around 30-40% of their capacity. In our case, it was not really like we were built data engineers or we had experience. There was a lot of research being done on the way, a lot of consultations. So take this as like with a big grain of salt. It really depends on many factors. But very roughly speaking, I think it would be somewhere around 300 hours to create. But really, it's extremely heavily dependent on many factors. Just if you're looking for a ballpark figure, this is something that, in case you did it for the first time, you'd be probably looking at. So even from that point of view, you can probably see that in case you don't have an experienced team, and they would have to go our way, lots of trial and errors, and they won't do it over one weekend or over 1 year. And the thing is, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I think that we're gonna skip the CRM altogether. I can get back to it like after the Q&A, just to not hold you guys back. So we go over the time limit, but we still have a couple of minutes left as we started late. So I just drift through our, let's call that learnings, or just like random thoughts on the way. So greatest advantage of doing things is customizability. Uh, Obviously, it's cost effective, but just the way it allows you to work with any data you want and combine it that in any insight and any dashboard you want is just awesome. And also because uh, we like to go deep and we like to analyze stuff. In case you're similar to us, you know that once you're gonna start going and once you see some interesting data, you kind of don't want the technology to hold you back. So just the ability to have everything structured in one place and accessible, ASO product and marketing, that just makes it really great. So so lots of freedom, and in case you actually have a good structure, it can be very easy to use. And it never will be like you're using Mixpanel or Amplitude and creating cohorts and based on behavior and stuff. That's not what such a tool can be used for. It can rather be kind of used for some initial analysis, and then you can go into SQLing data. But that's kind of once you actually have questions that can be answered. What we've seen, in case you've got multiple analysts, uh, definitely I'd be looking at some kind of a system which would allow me to do it anyway. But if you're starting out, you don't have many analysts, then um, usually people just don't ask these questions anyway, to be honest. So just one thing to consider when thinking about uh, if this would be to the detriment that you basically can use the default dashboard or the dashboards that you create, and creating new ones can be some additional work for the data engineer, although not a lot of work. Ease of use, uh, great for marketing ASO, okay for product usage. You're gonna see the major things in there. If in case you want to go deeper, well, just use Looker, Tableau, other tools, SQL, whatever. It's just it will never give you like that kind of an awesome flexibility, but still, in case it's coupled with other tools, you can basically achieve whatever you want. For cost, as we mentioned, cost efficient data can be aggregated. Uh, the necessary expertise, that's also I mentioned, lots of trial and error. In case you're having or you have multiple networks to connect to, it can be a pain working with many APIs, but can be solved with another intermediary tool, which would kind of bulk them together and send it your way. And four, that's I think one extremely important insight. There's not one thing that would be complicated in the process. It's just like there's no rocket science in it. It's really about there's a lot of small cogwheels that you need to tune right, and lots of small kind of understandings that you need to get along the way. So there's like not one big thing that would be an obstacle. It's just along the way we encountered many things that went wrong or just broke, so that's something to consider for everybody. There's a lot of small pieces. It's gonna break. It's gonna take some time until it's worked out well, and the building time obviously can be a factor. Batch process versus real time, also super important thought. In case you're working with games that need some real time analytics, real time reporting, or whatever, you're probably not gonna want to use this type of a setup. Just from the philosophy of it, Firebase dumps the data unpredictably. You won't be able to use it. Vendor lock-in, also mentioned already, can be a pain for some people, but once again, careful what you play for and careful what you pay for. So that's something to consider. And that's, I believe, what sums it up pretty well in terms of our additional learnings. And there's a lot that we can share, but I think that now we're kind of opening the bag in terms of, hey, these are probably like on the high level, the most important insights in terms of how we approach the process. And now over to you. Over to you. In case you've got questions that you'd like to ask at this point, we'll be super happy to answer. Yes, you can. It's just the sound quality is extremely bad. I don't know if everybody else is experiencing it, but try. Yeah, perhaps it would be better if you can just type it into the chat because we're really having a hard time making this out. Okay. So let me go to Google Meet. I'm just gonna finish sharing the screen. What are the downsides to building custom? Have you seen issues where bugs in the custom stack cause overbidding and other costly mistakes? Ah, that's a good question. And you can also mention a part of the answer. Things can go wrong, but honestly, things in all the tools can go wrong. And in case you're building it yourself, you're kind of responsible for your own mistakes. But I believe that like the proneness to fuck ups can be a detriment, but I mean that's just something that you have to deal with. Things can go wrong. And I personally think that the biggest downside is just you don't have that awesome capability to really analyze, stuff like in the off-the-shelf tools. That there's a lot of things that they offer that you're partly missing, and it's not that convenient. So you can still do it; it's just not that convenient. But if you ask me, this is probably the biggest downside, like not having that capability. Otherwise, I think that companies just eventually will gravitate towards building custom. In case you grow big enough, you just have more and more tools, and you need one place where it all fits together. And have you seen issues where bugs cause overbidding and other costly mistakes? Well, we didn't. But that doesn't mean at all that it doesn't happen. That's definitely something that I would be worried about, and I would take extreme caution when working with the data, which means just having it in some kind of a pilot period where I'd be double checking the data against all the platform data, and only once I'm confident that it works, I'd use that as my kind of one source of truth. But definitely would go through the trial period. So didn't see it, but that doesn't mean that that it's not easy to make one. So from Ryan, for small companies, are there things you recommend setting up or collecting from day one to make life easier down the road, installing the Facebook SDK, for example? Um, well, now we're kind of in a what if stage, but what we recommend mostly is just get the Firebase SDK, get a solid event collection, and start sending the data into BigQuery. And you're going to have the raw data in there basically ready to be used in the future in case you need to. And you're not going to be basically paying anything for that. So that's kind of a great deal. And otherwise, yeah, I'm thinking about if the question is from day one to make life easier down the road, if it's kind of looking, at usage of data in the long-term horizon, or if the question is rather tiered about, hey, we're a startup, we're kind of thinking about what we should collect right from the get-go. Oh, okay. Uh-huh. Mhm. Well, I'm going to answer in general. Just get all the data you can that can make any sense in the future, really. In this case, it was easier because they did not have any analytics whatsoever. So this was just, starting on an empty field, which made this a pointless question, kind of. So we wished they collected everything. But exactly as you mentioned, kind of having all the data, basically. And that's what BigQuery is ideal for.
I think that it's good to plan data collection during app development and not edit after it's released. But if you can, if it's possible, then think about analytics during the app development.
And to stress that out even more, that's probably what we just said, like the biggest issue. That people don't have a good understanding. They don't really plan for it. They have some small bits and pieces and they think it's going to work out. And the biggest headache comes when they realize they don't have the right data. They start collecting the right data and then they want to somehow like stitch it together with the data they've been collected until that point. So that's why it's crazy. So also one of the reasons why we're kind of sharing our workflow and why we're sharing all the tables and showing you that, hey, we're kind of having this pretty structured is that we realized there should be a clear plan. It all should be documented in an ideal case scenario. And if you really have it like that from the very beginning, nothing really can surprise you that much. So if that answers the question, hopefully it does.
Thank you.
Cool. So another one from Serak Menesi. Number one, I wanted to ask about using Firebase as a CRM. So Serak, if you've got some minutes to spare, we can just finish the Q&A because we've got a couple more slides that I skipped that go into that in more detail. So in case you've got time, just message into the chat and we can show you later on. Same applies for everybody, obviously. All right, awesome. If we need real-time data, would you recommend Segment or ideally other open source alternatives? I don't know if we can recommend something. It's number two. I personally don't have experience with it, so I can't really answer that.
Me neither, but I think Segment is fine too. To be honest, I'm not sure about open source alternatives which are useful for this, and but I think Segment is fine. But to be honest, we never dealt with real-time data, so not so much experience with it.
Yep. David and everybody else want to stick around to see the CRM. It's actually like quote unquote full of CRM. It's a couple of slides, but yeah, feel free to stick around. We'll be happy to guide you. And what are the consequences of not doing real-time data? Well, Serak, basically you tell us what are the consequences. It's up to you. Not sure what app or game do you have. Might be, I don't know, perhaps an issue for some games that do offers which are based on people behavior. That's kind of when you can't really spend 2 days waiting for Firebase data.
Can you hear me?
Oh yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic.
Ah.
So kind of we have a lot of redemptions that users do on the wallet side.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of the first instinct into why we need real-time data. But that was my main concern.
Well, we're looking at this infrastructure as basically a reporting infrastructure, and in most cases, in case the data comes late, it doesn't really impact any long-term decisions. If it does, you just go to the source of the data and you need to tackle it somehow. So yeah, we basically don't worry that much about real-time data because the delay, if it's a couple hours or if it's a day or two, doesn't really impact anything in our case.
Okay, great.
All right, Sarah, regarding Q1, that's basically the CRM, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So anybody else has questions at this point, or should we switch back and speak a couple words about the CRM too? So the room fell silent. So I guess that's our answer right there. So let me just share my screen again. Here we go. So yeah, right here. So you see it's a couple of slides just to manage expectations, but we can definitely discuss around because I see that you're interested in that. So please take it.
This is just a really basic customer relationship manager, which can be done in Firebase. And the first step is to create audience. In other words, a segment you want to target. Here's a screenshot from Firebase. You can create for example, audience like who installed and entered a shop within first 2 days but didn't buy anything. So basically, you can define some event sequences with which the user have to do. You can exclude users who didn't do anything, let's say, or they are from Asia and you don't want to target there. And it can actually show you how many users fall into the audience. So you can create a lot of audiences for different purposes and use them for targeting notification in-app messages. So the main hammer, let's say, for CRM is our notifications. So
Just before you get there, did you mention that these are prospective audiences?
I think that
it's important too.
I think it's still I would say not well done in a Firebase that the defined audiences are just prospective. So it means that it starts collecting users once you finish the creation. It will not like include the users from the past.
If you today decided there's going to be some rule that, for example, if the person has, I don't know, 10 likes on a profile, you're going to send him a message. That means that for user that does it today, we're going to send a message, but not for users that already have 50, for example. So it doesn't go back. The notifications will only be sent going forward if that rule is met.
So you can create a notification and some image. Then you can select the target. So you select the you want to target. If you have more than in your Firebase project, then you can select the user audience. Like you have created, you can add more audiences, and then you set up scheduling. This is new for last couple of months. That you can set like a daily scheduling, like let's say the notification about shop shop cart will be sent to this audience to the new users in this audience daily at let's say 12 o'clock, and also you can choose that it will be at recipient time zone. So let's say users in America who have like 4 a.m. Won't be notified, but it will be sent at their 12 p.m. You can set up that it will like it can be send it from today to no end or just for 1 week because you offer some extra offer. Then what is to set up is really similar to notification is in-app messages. It's let's say this window pop up when a user achieved some level. You can also choose like background color, images, etc., and choose the audience who will be targeted. And the last thing, which is quite new and it's not so advanced, are emails. because Firebase now offers extensions which are currently in beta, and you can install extensions to synchronize your users with your MailChimp, which is, I think, quite useful just when you want to send onboarding emails, because it will just add the new user to the MailChimp list, and then you can work there. But I think it's not, or currently I don't know how to do, for example, that the user hasn't visited your app for last month, so send him an email. This is something I'm not sure how to do, to be honest. And the second option is like trigger email when the user makes some event which is like written into the Firestore database. So that's something what developers need to prepare. Yep. So there are basically three main areas of CRM which are currently possible to do in Firebase, and the conclusion is, if it's usable, I think yes for some purposes, but what's currently hard to do is to target like specific users based on specific actions. It's more like it's all about audiences. So you can send let's say you can send special offers based on some prediction to specific user, but more to whole audience. And also emails are like in beta, let's say, that, as I already said, the example, you can't send email when the user isn't hasn't visited your app for a month.
What would you recommend as a more sophisticated tool if we have kind of more targeting, if we want more targeting in our campaigns?
Well, the tools that come to mind are Leaplam and Braze, which are usually mentioned as like the cutting edge tools. So in case you want to spend some bucks, then definitely these are great tools which offer great freedom. But I believe it's a couple thousands per month, so it can be quite costly. Also, OneSignal, I don't know, I'm not sure about the pricing that they've got now, but could be also an alternative. So these are the tools that come to mind without kind of looking deeper into your use case. But those are the industry leaders.
Maybe if you have experienced developers, I recommend to search through Stack Overflow. Maybe the notification can be done via Cloud Functions on Google Cloud Platform.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I'm not a developer, so I wasn't digging deeper.
Okay. And using this CRM for retargeting. So if you want to kind of use a kind of build, if would you do the cohorts on BigQuery and then push to these different social media platforms or back to Google Google Ads to retarget users?
To be super honest, we don't have experience with creating such a setup.
Okay.
But probably something that you're mentioning is probably what we do. Just like define which users do we want to be retargeted,
Yeah.
and then automatically just push it through. Yeah, but we'd have to build the system. Like we were never tasked with that thus far, so no experience.
One thing I recall, you can, for example, if you have AppsLayer, you can do server-to-server connection, and you can send back some postbacks to AppsLayer, and it can spread across the ad networks. So it's maybe one possible way how to do it.
Yep. All right. So that would be the conclusion. I'd like to show one last slide if it's here we go. That kind of falls into the one question that we got asked about what are the downsides of the custom analytics. Thinking about that, there's also like we have get one-time build fees. Obviously, it's not a fee for you. It's basically it takes a lot of time and testing at the beginning, and if you build it yourself, then basically there's no SLA besides the person that built it. So in case a wave crashes his back or he leaves the company, it can be pretty problematic because there's a couple of knowledge holders in the company, and if the key personnel leave, it can really like leave you with not a vendor lock-in, but in a sense with an employee lock-in. So that's also one thing that perhaps should be considered, but can be prevented. Yeah, know-how, the capacity to just maintain the system in-house. It just really depends on how complicated would your setup be. And that's where we're kind of getting into the realm of what ifs and specific cases. So in general, it can be extremely useful, it can be extremely cost efficient, but then it really depends on kind of sitting down and weighing the pros and cons. So that would be just my addition to that question. All right, so back to the chat. I wonder if anybody else has some questions or would like to hear us talk about some part of the presentation somewhere.
Sorry to do this again, guys, but what would the AWS alternative be here? So would it be Redshift and then using something like Amazon Pinpoint?
Yeah, as far as I know, honest, I don't know the exact name, but I think Amazon has also a data collector for mobile apps. Then you can run Matillion also on AWS because it's multi-platform. And instead of Data Studio, they have, I think, QuickSight, but I have no experience with this data visualization tool. But I think everything can be done on AWS. Also on Microsoft Azure, it's possible to do because they have data collector in Microsoft App Center.
If you probably started on AWS, we'd just stay on AWS. So this kind of comes from just our historical experience, but it's not saying that one platform is better than the other. We don't really we're not really comparing.
Okay, thank you.
All right, for David, are you going to share the slides? Yes, we will share the slides, and we're also going to share the recording. Hopefully, if the whole thing recorded, it was supposed to be recorded automatically by Zoom, so now we're using a software to do that. So hopefully it's gonna work, and then we'll be able to share it with you too. I'd love to see specific examples of the free dashboards, product marketing, and App Store view. David, we can probably share that with you, but I guess some other time because we don't have the demo account ready at this point. So in case you'll be interested, we can just jump on another call perhaps later this week and show you more how it works in the real life. Obviously, that applies with everybody else too. It's just we'll be happy to give you some more insights or show more. So everybody else seems to be quiet. So I don't know, guys. Any more questions, or should we call us off? So I guess that's gonna that's calling it off. So thanks everybody for sticking with us. Hopefully you find some parts or more parts of that interesting. We'll be super keen to hear any kind of a feedback you might have, especially how to improve for the next time and what was interesting during the presentation. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, there's like a lot of things that we can go through in more detail, and we just tried our best to cover most. Hopefully it worked. But yeah, please let us know. My email should be in the invitation for this session. So